We can only see as far forward as we remember back.
I don't know what the future's going to be, and there may not be a future. There may not be one. It may all end in disaster of one kind or another.
The Greek historian Plato believed that there had been many great civilizations that had disappeared in a variety of catastrophes. Today, humanity has forgotten the past. In the human unconscious, there is an extremely powerful force that acts on an individual, keeping him from seeing with clarity the obvious symptoms of his next death. Only in the last moments are the eyes of the soul opened and man understands his situation and accepts it. The landslide of all the empires and all the human institutions is evident as soon as one studied the past. Why do we believe in a progress without end? Everything dies around us. High atop a vast plateau in the wild Carpathian Mountains of old Europe, there is an unknown, enigmatic sculpture that strikingly resembles the Great Sphinx of Egypt. For that reason, it was named the Carpathian Sphinx. Could there be a link between the Carpathian Sphinx and the Great Sphinx of Egypt? Could the Carpathian Sphinx be the result of a lost civilization? While living in Boston, I go and I check all the library sources I can find. Unconvinced by what I find, I decide to leave the United States. And I return to Eastern Europe, to the homeland I left 15 years before. The Sphinx was calling me to unravel its hidden story. I had to solve the mystery. Could the Carpathian Mountains and the Sphinx have a central yet forgotten role in the history of the world?
I'm probably best known in certain circles for my work on the Sphinx. I'm only going to mention that very briefly because I sort of feel like I have to, because in many ways it does set the stage for what we're here about at this conference on precession, ancient knowledge, and really pushing things way back. And this work that goes back almost 2 decades now for myself personally really set the stage for much of what has come later. And I'm not claiming any credit here, I'm giving credit to the Sphinx. And it's also changed my life. Usually I think for the better, sometimes I wonder what I got myself into. So I really started on the Sphinx work when I was very young. This is me about 20 years ago. And what it really indicated doing, at least for some people, and this was part of the controversy and part of why we're here now, is talking about, if you push the day of the Sphinx back, does it mean that we have to view history differently? Do we have to rewrite history?
Dr. Robert Schock, a geologist from Boston University, is an expert in ancient stone. He had studied the Egyptian Sphinx for many decades, and he believes that the Egyptian Sphinx is much older than traditionally believed, dating back many thousands of years before the rise of Egyptian culture.
The head was recarved into the human form that it takes now. Parts of the Sphinx itself, if you look at it to this day, it's been heavily repaired. Some of those repairs go back 4,000 and more years because it was a much more ancient statue, thousands of years earlier. Things were happening in Egypt at a much earlier period than conventional archaeologists, conventional historians have ever admitted or suspected.
Dr. Shak believes that the fundamental ideas and the great knowledge of Egyptians to be more ancient than the Egyptian civilization itself. Dan Bernanu, a researcher from Bucharest, has spent the last 40 years investigating what he believes is the legacy of a lost civilization. All around the Carpathian Mountains and the plateau where the Sphinx is located, Dan Bernanu sees great evidence of a lost civilization.
Aici, uite, un om, un ochi, doi ochi, nasul.
Nas mare?
Aici, dantura, rânjind așa, nasul e simplist, fără nări. Așa, și aici, probabil, totuși un proces de degradare.
Daniel Rousseau, a Peruvian archaeologist and protohistorian from Peru, has come to believe that there once had been a great worldwide civilization that had been destroyed in a cataclysm. This civilization left marks all over the world in all the continents. Rousseau found proof in England in such monuments as the Stonehenge, in France in Fontainebleau. Wherever he looked, he found proof. He became aware that the civilization was especially a mountain civilization that lived on the high peak of the mountains in all the continents. In 1954, Rousseau discovered Marcahuashi, a small plateau high atop the Andes Mountains in Peru. Marcahuashi, up to this date, remains a mystery. There are faces here of women. He called this one the Monument to Humanity. Rousseau believed that the Monument to Humanity was one of the most important sculptures ever made. In 1968, Rousseau came to the Carpathian Mountains in Romania. Here, Rousseau found the proof that he was searching for. Everywhere he looked on the Bucegi Massif in the Carpathian Mountains, he found proof of a very ancient culture. He believed here was the door to the treasure of a lost people. Rousseau believed that the treasure is not a material one, but a spiritual treasure. Rousseau investigated the area around the Carpathian Sphinx, and he found tantalizing proof of this lost civilization here as well. The Carpathian Sphinx is an ancient monument sculpted before the flood, destroyed in the face, being very corroded by wind and rain. Rousseau concluded that the Carpathian Sphinx, just as the monument to humanity in Marcahuashi, was the important legacy of a lost people. When he returned to Peru, Rousseau published a book called The Fantastic History of a Discovery, and in that book he wrote about the trip to Romania. He dedicated a chapter to what he saw in the Carpathian Mountains, and he said, "The Romanian Carpathian Mountains were at the center of the oldest European civilization known today." His conclusions were made after he saw the Carpathian Sphinx. Rousseau died in 1991, before he was able to find this worldwide vanished civilization. But his work paved the road for later research. Rousseau was confident that he was right, and that one day someone will clarify the mystery and fill the empty question marks. Who were these vanished people that left their imprints in these monuments? It is in these sacred mountains where people found their salvation after the flood, and where they will be saved when the next catastrophe occurs. It is vital today to find these sacred mountains and sacred caves. Here we are in front of an original sculpture known all over the world that has not been reproduced in historical times. Being so used to the three-dimensional landscape starting in Sumerian times, we had failed until today to see these sculptures considered made by nature. The strangest apparition on the plateau is the Sphinx, a huge rock with an enigmatic profile around which a proto-historical legend had been formed. The legend says that the Sphinx is a statue made in times long forgotten by the people of a lost civilization.
Sort of U-shaped. You can't tell this from down at the base of the mountains. It's really like a fortress up there.
From a distance, it looks very abrupt, uninviting, with steep, rocky areas that are very hard to climb. But the reality of the mountain is actually something different.
Interestingly, once you get up there, you get the unexpected. It opens up into a huge plateau.
The Sphinx is the central point on the plateau. Going south, directly from the Sphinx, there is a group of enigmatic rocks called the Peaks of Longing. From here, in direct line to the north, one can see the Sphinx and then the highest peak, called Omu, the peak of the human being.
Something that's very interesting looking at the Sphinx in Romania, looking at the plateau, looking at the surrounding area, is you have these, at high elevation, you have these incredible structures. They can be seen from a very great distance. They certainly seem like markers or signposts or something that might attract ancient peoples, and I think this is something we have to take very seriously.
Many of the rocks on the plateau have feminine names. This one is called the Big Old Lady Rock. These ones are the old ladies of Kokora Mountain. This is the mountain of the old lady. The Yalomitsa Valley hides the mountain called the Goddesses Mountain. The highest peak in Bucegi, facing the north direction, the peak of the human being. This mountain is called the Origin or the Beginning Mountain. The main river flowing down the valley below the Goddesses Mountain was called the Naparis, which means Heavenly One. So the question is, why are all these women names in this mountain? And the sacred names, such as the mountain of the goddesses and the mountain called human being. Could there have been here a religious matriarchal society at one point in time? Could there have been a very ancient feminine worship? The origin of these names must be discovered, as the myths as well as the sculptures are before the time of the flood. The Sphinx has multiple profiles, best seen with the changing light. Where do the orbits of the Sphinx point to? Why are there all these figures, especially the ones looking west, towards the setting sun? The profile that resembles the Egyptian Sphinx is looking north. The profile that resembles an anthropoid face is looking west. Why does one profile look towards the north and another towards the west? One to the northern sky and the other one towards the setting sun. Why? And where is the door to the treasure? Who is this spirited god? Will I ever find out? The enigmatic faces are only seen from certain points of view. They are best seen with the changing light, the shadows of the moon and the sun. Will the sun point to a secret direction? Rousseau believed these monuments point to the sacred treasure found in caves. And what is the mystery of the gigantic rock, resembling very much a podium, a stage? Could its place have been used from some type of performance, from some rituals of a vanished humanity? A vast crowd could have been in the valley, looking up at somebody performing, singing or dancing on the top. Could this be the door to the treasure? Could this relate back to the Sphinx, to the caverns that Daniel Rousseau was talking about? Could the spiritual treasure Daniel Rousseau was talking about be found in these caves? This cave is on the mountain called Goddess's Mountain. Could there be any traces here that would point to a lost civilization? Daniel Rousseau considered that only an expert could find this door. Where do I need to look to find the answers? Could this be an ancient religious center, as Daniel Rousseau had concluded? Could there be a spiritual treasure here?
Some people think the world of long ago contains a body of great secrets, like some treasure trove of insights that will unlock the universe's hidden doors.
Or new, undiscovered technologies that will free us from drudgeries. I doubt that such is the case. The gifts of the ancient world go much deeper.
I think when we look for this lost civilization, there may have been lost civilizations, but they were not necessarily what we expect or what many people expect. That is, they were not a mirror image in the past of what we are today.
They lived around the mountains and carved into them. They appreciated the natural beauty and had high mental abilities. Rousseau called them the guardians of an ancient wisdom. It was a magical work done by a culture whose science and understanding of the world was different from the present. It was from these people that we had inherited all our ancient wisdom, our sense of religion, and spirituality. The world we had today was the legacy of a lost civilization. All the symbolic systems, all the legendary characters, all the myths and the legends do not have the name of the author. We have inherited them from a vanished humanity.
If Daniel Russo was right about an ancient lost civilization, was this ancient lost civilization actually what we would now call Neanderthals? So going back tens of thousands of years into the last ice age.
Could the Neanderthals be the anonymous authors of our legends and myths, of our ancient wisdom? Could the lost civilization that Daniel Rousseau had been searching for his entire life without finding be the extinct Neanderthal civilization? Is there any valid evidence to support such an original hypothesis? Born in London to working-class parents and spending most of his days in England and Wales, on the surface, Stan Guth's life may not have seemed particularly exciting, but it was his remarkable intellectual journey that distinguished him as a person and where his legacy lies. In relative isolation, Stan Guth studied the elements of human evolution and the human psyche, and he came to an astonishing conclusion.
We are a hybrid species. We are a crossbreed between two very different types of early man, Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon.
Guth authored many books including Total Man, Personality and Evolution, The Neanderthal Question, Guardians of the Ancient Wisdom, and The Double Helix of the Mind. However, Guth never gained the popular audience, critical acclaim, or monetary remuneration that he had hoped for. Indeed, Guth became convinced that the establishment was deliberately ignoring him. By the late 1980s, he had all but given up his studies and writing and went almost into total seclusion. In the end, Guth did entertain the thought that perhaps, after his death, his contributions might be widely acknowledged. Guth was convinced that the Neanderthals had been underestimated.
For Stan Guth, Neanderthals were their own species. They had their own culture. They had their own civilization even. He used terms like cities of dreams, that they built cities of dreams. They had a dream culture. They had an advanced, sophisticated culture.
Guth believed that the ancient moon worship was possessed by the Neanderthals.
Neanderthal was, in fact, nocturnal, or at least semi-nocturnal, and worshipped the moon, whereas Cro-Magnon was a daylight creature, a hunter and whatever, and worshipped the sun.
The Neanderthals lived in Europe during the Ice Age for at least 100,000 years. Neanderthals' range included all of Europe and parts of Asia, the Middle East, and the Levant. During the time of the Neanderthals, in the Carpathian Mountains, there was a high population of cave bears, one of the biggest populations in Europe. There is still a puzzling mystery why Neanderthals went extinct, but a number of possible scenarios had been proposed by scientists, ranging from natural disasters, massive earthquakes, and catastrophic volcanic eruptions in Europe, but also human diseases. It is unclear if the Cro-Magnon massively eliminated Neanderthal on purpose, or if they were already doomed. Contrary to popular belief, many Neanderthal populations in Europe had light skin, green eyes, and red hair.
Typically, people had the concept of Neanderthals as being dark, brutish, ape-like, if you would, and the Cro-Magnons, our ancestors, were the light-skinned, fair-haired individuals, maybe totally opposite, that in fact the early archaic Homo sapiens were much darker than the Neanderthals that they came in contact with in Europe. Gooch predicted this long ago.
Neanderthals were much stronger than modern humans. The body type of a Neanderthal can easily be compared to that of a modern wrestler or bodybuilder. They were not delicate, nor what we would consider beautiful, but surprisingly, Neanderthals were highly emotional and a very sensitive bunch. There is strong evidence from their anatomy suggesting they had a very well-developed vocal apparatus, powerful voices, perfect pitch, and a more sensitive inner ear than the one of the modern human. Steve Mithun, an archaeologist from the UK, thinks Neanderthals were the most musically developed human species that ever lived. They were musically inclined, amazing singers, and they were great performers. The Neanderthals were a nocturnal species, and they worshipped the moon. They came out at night and performed ceremonies for the moon goddess, especially at full moon or new moon. Anatomical evidence for nocturnal lifestyle rests on the Neanderthals' very large round eye sockets and very large ear apertures. Large eyes, in particular, are the special hallmark of a nocturnal creature. The Neanderthals learned how to not fear the darkness, and in the process, they fell in love with the night sky. The Neanderthals worshipped the northern sky. They considered that the still center of the heavens was in the north. They worshipped the northern constellations, the constellation of the Little Bear and the Big Bear. According to Stan Gooch, the cave bear ritual of the Neanderthals is the oldest ritual in the world performed by a human species.
The Neanderthal may have been far more intelligent than we recognize. Neanderthal man appeared to know far more about the stars, for example, than one would suppose. I mean, our general picture of Neanderthal is obviously of a shambling ape. And Stan argued that in fact he knew an enormous amount about the heavens and also about precession of the equinoxes and about all kinds of other things.
Symbolic behavior was central to the Neanderthal culture. Neanderthals may advance stone tools, cooked their meals, and ate vegetables. They wore jewelry and body painting, had their own language system, and lived in complex social groups. They collected and preserved crystals and minerals, and probably made figurines. In Stan Gooch's view, Neanderthals were culturally advanced people, highly civilized in spirit, with a deep sense of religion and practiced herbal medicine. The Neanderthal society was fully ruled by women. They were the ultimate authority. The night and moon ceremonies of Neanderthal were presided over by priestesses.
We've got the sun, the positive, and the moon, the negative, whatever you want to call them. It's incredible, really. And that's why the moon and sun fascinate us so much, because they reflect, as it were, literally, our own duality.
The Neanderthal society was peaceful, compassionate, and loving to one another. Central to their life was religion and magical practices. Neanderthals were what we would call today magicians, also shamans, and also wizards. Cro-Magnon's life was rooted in the concept of male ownership. This was a society fully ruled by men. It was a society who worshipped the sun and lived for daylight.
About hunting and producing weapons, things like that, Cro-Magnon was certainly superior. But if you're talking about knowledge of herbs, then I would say Neanderthal was superior. It depends what you're talking about.
He was interested in things like brain structure. He pointed out rightfully that Neanderthals on average had larger brains than modern humans, but these larger brains were differently arranged, differently proportioned than our modern humans. So for instance, a very important point of Gooch, one that he makes over and over in his writings and books, is that Neanderthal brains had larger cerebellums. The brain of humans, be it Neanderthal or modern humans, is composed of a cerebrum and a cerebellum. The cerebellum is sometimes referred to as a smaller brain. The lesser brain is essentially, one could argue, a separate brain housed inside and underneath anatomically the rest of the brain. Gooch points out that the cerebellum was larger in Neanderthals. He attributes, and I believe perhaps rightfully so based on clinical evidence, that the cerebellum is really the seat of many mental abilities, many mental processes that we to this day have a very poor understanding of. So for instance, dreams may originate primarily in the cerebellum. Certain types of artistic impulses, religious impulses, impulses of the sacred, certain, we could call it loosely philosophical and psychical impulses.
My view is that Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon crossbred in Central Europe some 30, 35,000, 40,000 years ago.
When Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon interbred, Stan Gooch believes each side made a unique contribution. At one level, this was a cultural cross-fertilization, but at a deeper level, it was a genetic encounter. Neanderthal contributed our religious genes, while Cro-Magnon contributed our scientific endowment. A project to sequence the Neanderthal genome took off in 2006 with the participation of the Planck Institute in Zurich, Switzerland, and the Broad Institute of Harvard and MIT in Boston. In May 2010, the Genome Project revealed shocking results. Interbreeding between Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon took place, resulting from 1 to 4% of the current European and Asian populations having Neanderthal genes.
You have these two cultures meeting, very different worldviews, essentially a duality. The scientific on the one hand, the religious on the other hand. I can imagine the Cro-Magnons studying the Neanderthals, perhaps surreptitiously at first, trying to understand, well, what are these weird people doing? What is all this about? What are these strange rituals and practices, these ceremonies, this dancing, this singing that they were observing? What is this all about? Cro-Magnons could not necessarily understand what was going on. They tried to figure out what was going on, but it was very alien to them.
Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal did not interbreed peacefully, in my opinion. Basically, it was Cro-Magnon raping Neanderthal woman. That's how we arose. And that's why it says in the Old Testament, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, these were the mighty men of old. Their offspring were the mighty men of old. Like sons of God, Cro-Magnon, male. Daughters of men, female, Neanderthal. It was Cro-Magnon raping Neanderthal woman, in my opinion, that produced us.
Our culture, our religious impulses, many of our institutions, societal institutions, are really a combination of both Neanderthal institutions or religious aspects, if you want to call it that, and Cro-Magnons, that the Cro-Magnons really adopted or inherited or actually took over many Neanderthal concepts, many Neanderthal mental innovations, for instance, maybe symbolism, religious ceremonies, many of what in a most deep-seated way make up our culture, make up our identity as we see it today.
A lot of our culture and our beliefs and our disbeliefs come from Neanderthal. So we've incorporated much of the Neanderthal material into our lives. Now, in particular, picking on this in particular, I maintain that the story of Christ and the resurrection and all of it is simply a distorted version of the ancient moon religion. Crucified on the cross. The cross is the symbol for the moon in all pre-Christians cultures worldwide. He's crucified on Friday, which is Friar's Day. She's the moon goddess. He's resurrected on Monday, which is Moon Day. He's resurrected 3 days later than he dies. Now, 3 is important for several reasons in the moon culture. One, the moon has 3 colors, white, red and black. So the moon has 3 colors. And what's more important than that? Oh yeah, the other thing, of course, is that Earth, Moon and Sun are considered to be mother, father, child. You know, the Earth is the child, the daughter, in fact, the daughter of the Sun and the Moon. That was part of the moon religion. So the 3 is important for several reasons. Christ is said to have been born on the 25th of December. Now that's 3 days, did you say 3? 3 days after the shortest day, when the sun is reborn every year after the moon sacrifices him on the shortest day. She sacrifices him and then resurrects him so that life can continue.
Could the story of Jesus Christ be based upon a far older story of Neanderthal rituals? Could our most cherished religious beliefs originate with the Neanderthals, such as the concepts we have of immortality and resurrection? Could the Bible be an actual historical source that had preserved some of the Neanderthal fundamental wisdom, preserving it for us in a veiled form? Ralph Solecki, an archaeologist who worked at the Smithsonian Institution, went to do an excavation in northern Iraq in a cave called Shanidar. What he discovered, he published in a book called Shanidar, the First Flower People. In the cave of Shanidar, Solecki discovered 9 Neanderthal skeletons, the most ever found in one cave. During the excavations that took many years to uncover, Solecki discovered something extraordinary that changed completely the perception of Neanderthal up to that point. This was 1971. What he discovered was a burial with flowers. The Neanderthals had buried their dead with seasonal flowers that also had medicinal purposes. This was quite shocking to discover. The compassion of these people and the fact that they believe in an afterlife. The flowers found in the Shanidar cave are found in Buchej. It was a spring burial with flowers that were white, violet, and yellow. In his excavations, Solecki discovered other things that changed our perception of Neanderthal. He discovered the skeletons of handicapped and old people, so it meant that the Neanderthal had to take care of their sick and their old. Isn't that such a human touch? Solecki called the Neanderthals people with such good characters. We should be proud to have them as our ancestors. This is a far cry from the view of Neanderthal held for most of this century, that they were a brutal subspecies of humans. In light of recent evidence, Neanderthal emerges shockingly close to a mother human, a sensitive, highly intelligent creature with a well-developed culture and a well-developed sense of self. Like any good scientific theory, Gooch's ideas are subjects to testing and further exploration. Two hours walking distance from the Sphinx, there is a cave called the Bear Cave, because a lot of cave bear remains had been found here, as well as Neanderthal tools and two Neanderthal huts. It is possible, I believe, that the Neanderthals used this cave not only for living, but they used it to perform rituals. Daniel Rousseau considered that everywhere else in the world, the legends and the sculptures had been forgotten, but here, in the Carpathian Mountains of Romania, the legends keep alive the memory. A legend called the Alomița Cave, collected by the Romanian Queen Elizabeth, talks about an old magician, an old wizard who was isolated here, who lived in seclusion, and who practiced herbal medicine, and who was very, very knowledgeable. Another legend talks about Zamolxis.
The cult of Zalmoxis. This was recorded by the ancient Greek historian Herodotus, but clearly goes back to much more ancient times. I suspect it actually goes back to Neanderthal times.
And when he emerged, he was designated god of immortality and of the night.
It was clearly a cult that believed in immortality, that there was something beyond physical death, there was something beyond the material existence, there was something that we might call a soul that would continue, that would survive. This is actually not a belief that the ancient Greeks, for instance, had, but it seems to have been a belief that the Neanderthals had.
The Bats Cave has not been properly excavated since the 1950s, when Neanderthal remains had been found here. The evidence in the Carpathian Mountains shows that the Neanderthal cave bear ritual is 75,000 years old, the oldest in the world.
It's important in my mind to carry out new excavations, not looking for just the same old, but also looking for new evidence with a new view, with a new frame of mind. No flowers have been found yet with any other prehistoric burials. We offer the suggestion here that up to this time, no one has looked for the evidence.
In early August, I returned to Bucharest to welcome a very special guest. Yes, exactly.
to uncover some new
Very
material.
important. Yes.
It's even looking today, I found, for instance, here's a tooth.
Oh wow.
The remains of a tooth that looks to me like a
Pretty big.
bear, ancient bear. You can see the root,
Yeah.
you can see the crown. It looks to me like a molar tooth. But to just come in here, just be looking for a few minutes and to find it right on the surface.
Plus, there's not only one type of ritual that they found with cave bears. That there are different formations, different arrangements.
So you have a
That implies complexity of
Exactly.
thinking.
different rituals maybe for different specific things. So there are variations on a theme, so there's a continuity, there's a connection, but there's also the variations. So it shows a real complexity. So here you have a connection, I think, at least anthropomorphic, a human connection between caves on the one hand and stone sculptures on the other hand. I find this absolutely amazing.
Yes.
Everyone looks at one side of the Sphinx and sees a face there, looks like a modern face, but if we walk around to the other side, look what we have. This is a face.
We have an anthropoid-looking face.
Exactly, but looks like a Neanderthal.
Very much so.
Neanderthal face with a big eye socket, low forehead. You can see the mouth and the nose here. And notice, and I think this is very telling, very important, the way it's facing. This face is looking toward the west. And we're here in the evening, the sun is setting.
Exactly.
Look how the sun is lined up.
Direct line to the eye.
Direct line to the eye. This Neanderthal type face is looking toward the west, looking toward the setting sun. Now, it's been speculated that Neanderthals were a more nocturnal species. If that's the case, what sun would they be interested in? The setting sun, the sun that sets as they come out for their nocturnal activities, their ceremonies, their rituals. So they would not be looking toward the east as many modern cultures do, but toward the west, the setting sun, which would be significant and important to them because essentially that would start their day, that would start their ceremonies. And here we have a Neanderthal-like face looking toward the setting sun. Yeah, looking at this face as a geologist, looking at the types of rock, you've got several different layers of rock. You've got more fine sandstones, you've got conglomerates, you've got rocks that are set within the rock. That's all natural.
Yes, like that one.
Like these pink rocks and these darker blackish rocks. And then you have what looks like a little hat on top of it, which is a slightly different rock, different lithology again. So you've got a very complex interplay of different rock types, and that's all natural. Then you have them shaped into this face, this profile, and that's where I start to wonder, is that totally natural erosional features, or is there the possibility that it started to look like a face because of natural erosional features? Is it possible that maybe people came, they pecked away at it, they modified it a little bit to look more like a face? We know from other places that does happen. Now, when I've walked around this, looked at it closely, it's so badly eroded that it's, I would say, virtually impossible to tell
At this point.
if there's any kind of artificiality to it. There could have been, I can't say for certain, but I think more importantly, in a way, it doesn't matter because you've got this profile, you've got this structure, it's clearly recognizable as a face, as a human profile.
Exactly.
When you walk around to the other side, you've got another clearly recognizable profile. They're oriented in important directions. This one toward the north, the other face that looks more Neanderthal toward the west. That's significant in both cases. So whether they're natural or whether they're artificial or some combination of both, I can see that they were incredibly important. They would have attracted attention in ancient times just as they do now. Many sacred sites around the world are natural, and they're maybe even considered more sacred because they are natural. They're from nature, they're from the gods.
Exactly, so it looks like a miracle has
That's
happened.
right, that's right, that's
That
right.
a natural rock
Exactly.
has the shape of a face or an animal.
Exactly. So this
Without any human touch.
Any artificiality. So in some ways, one could argue that if this is fully natural, it's even more spectacular, even more important, because it's an indication of something that could be considered from the gods, sacred divinity.
Exactly. If this is completely natural, I'm a lot more impressed
Yeah.
and moved
Exactly.
than if it was sculpted by the hand of man.
So I see this as a huge head, but really only the
yeah.
upper portion of the head, what I call the emerging head. And if you look at it, this to me looks like a nose.
Oh, exactly.
So you've got a nose starting
it's a
here.
huge nose.
Huge nose. You've got an eye socket here. And then above the eye socket, the brow ridge. And then a low forehead. And what's interesting is this forehead is not like a modern forehead, but much lower. The whole skull, the whole head is pulled back, elongated toward the back portion, which to me says this is a Neanderthal head.
Yeah.
It's not a modern head, but it's a Neanderthal head or Neanderthal face emerging from the bedrock.
Exactly, it's half a face.
Yeah, it's like
emerging
it's
up.
being born from the bedrock. And so not only do you have this face or this emerging head, which I think is very recognizable,
Oh, yeah.
Neanderthals would have recognized it, but you also have, look what we're standing on, sort of this staging area right in front of it, which I think could have been used for ritual purposes, ceremonies, initiations. It would make a perfect place. It's like a, I don't want to call it an altar, but a stage where things could take place
Exactly.
with the backdrop of the head. Here on this area in front of the emerging head, where I've suggested that ceremonies, rituals may have been taking place, look what we have. What this is sort of a scooped out area.
It's almost a round.
Yeah, it's a round sort of basin area. If you put your hand in it, it's filled with rainwater now and sediment. It's actually quite deep.
That is.
And
I mean, that is deep, and I'm not really touching the end.
yeah, it's quite
It's just
deep.
Sediments.
Yeah, it's just sediment that's collected in modern times. What I think we have here is really a depression or basin area that would have been perfect for ritualistic purposes, for different ceremonial purposes. It may have started out as a natural depression, but I believe it was probably enhanced by people rubbing it, scratching it. You see in more recent ancient sites from only a few thousand years ago, say at temple complexes in Egypt, in Turkey, places where people will rub the rock, they'll scrape it, and it makes depressions. They're trying to get the sacredness, the power from that sacred site. This may have been formed initially the same way. Formed this depression, this now serves for ceremonial purposes.
How many people would you need
Oh,
in order
many.
to create something like this?
Oh,
I
a
mean,
lot if you're scraping
over a
it
very
like
long
that
period
over a
of
very
time.
long period of time.
Thousands and thousands. And
Of generations
Yes,
potentially if
that
they're
is
doing it by
amazing.
hand and rubbing it or scraping away it. But once you have it, you've got this depression, this basin that could be used for any number of ceremonial purposes. Maybe it was filled with water and used for some kind of cleansing ritual. Maybe it was used for some kind of sanctified or holy water. We still have those concepts today, either cleansing rituals as you go into a sacred place, or holy water that brings the power of the sacred site and lets you maybe ingest it or sprinkle it on yourself. Baptism, we still use water from a basin from a depression. Maybe it was used to collect some kind of sacrifice for the gods. Maybe it was filled with liquid, maybe some kind of drink. Maybe it was used to collect blood if there were sacrifices of animals. We saw a little bit higher that basin area that may have been used for ceremonial purposes. To me, this is very similar. This is not exactly a basin. Possibly it was at one point if this is eroded back. In more recent times, you can see there's some breakage there. But what it looks like is an area that eroded out. You can put your hand in.
Because I really, I really can't. I'm not reaching the end.
No, it goes way back.
Probably up to.
At least back to there.
Yeah.
And what it looks to me like is a place where people may have been scraping at it, removing material. It's a slightly different rock here in the general matrix. It would have attracted attention. You see it's sort of an orangish reddish color, but like you see at other sacred sites of more recent origin, it may have been a place where people scratched it to try to get a little bit of powder, a little bit of the essentially power, the sacred power of this spot. Another feature that is on the plateau that really struck me is what we can call the bearded head or the bearded man's head. It's a huge structure, very powerful, very moving in my mind, and I suspect that whether it's natural or artificial or some combination of both, this is something that may have survived from a very long time ago, geologically, and may have moved people and been recognized by people, specifically Neanderthals, before the end of the last ice age, that they would have recognized this as looking like a face, as a bearded face, just like we do now. It almost looks to me like what some people's image of God is, you know, a Judeo-Christian bearded male figure. Interesting that you find it up in the mountains, and you approach it, and it seems to be, in my mind, in a sacred ritualistic setting. I'm told that the name that's been given to it is the Mechit. That's a name that goes back, we don't know exactly how long, but it's called the Mechit, which loosely translates as the church. And this suggests right away that there's something special about this area. What is the Mechit? It's this incredible limestone formation, huge formation, incredibly symmetrical, and it appears to me as if it were a stage or a podium, but of enormous scale. At a scale, I think, of giants. It's a huge scale, and it's symmetrically arranged. It itself is symmetrical, and it sits in a little valley area that forms, in my mind, a natural amphitheater. This, I can't help but think, would form a perfect stage for ceremonies, for ritual practices, for initiation, for other types of sacred and religious practices. In fact, maybe at night it would be even more dramatic if there were huge bonfires on the Mechit, if various trees, like evergreen trees, were thrown onto bonfires and then sparked up like fireworks, if there was drumming, if there was singing, music, voices. So I think this could be a very powerful setting for ceremonial purposes. All of the pieces, in my mind, come together here to suggest that this is a central location. the river, the ancient name for the river, which effectively originates at the Mechit, is sometimes interpreted or translated as divine river or the heavenly river. So here we have more allusions to the divine, to the sacred. But there's still more. On one side of the valley, the rock formations, the rock peak is referred to as the origin peak or the beginning peak. This suggests to me a religious connotation of the origins of the universe, the cosmos, of people. How did things originate? Sort of in a Judeo-Christian sense, a genesis. How did life itself and the universe, the cosmos, originate? On the other side of the valley, the formations are known as the goddesses. Clear reference to divinity, especially if we're talking about Neanderthals, and they put a lot of emphasis on women and goddesses. So we've got the goddesses, we've got the origins, we've got the Mechit, we've got the heavenly or divine river, and then if we keep going further north beyond the Mechit to the highest peak, we have the peak of the human being, which suggests to me the origins of life, the origins of humanity. Processions would be carried on, going up the river valley from the south, up toward the Mechit. As you ascend up the river valley toward the plateau, you find the Mechit as a very central location. There's nothing else like this in the vicinity. There's nothing like this in the area. There's nothing like this potentially in all of Europe. So perhaps this was a focal point, a gathering place for ancient Neanderthal people from a very broad geographic region. I could see this very much as a gathering place for sacred rituals, for ceremonies. In fact, as I've looked at the maps, as I've looked at the geology and the topography, the geography of this region, you don't have anything like this anywhere else. You don't have a place that's at high altitude where from below it looks like huge mountain peaks. In fact, we're in the Carpathian Mountains, but then when you get up to the top, it's like a fortress and it opens up into this plateau.
And in the middle of the fortress, there is
structures like this.
Natural or artificial feature.
Here it is. So this would be a gathering point. I see it very much as a gathering point, a ceremonial point. And I wonder, as I think about how widespread the populations were that would gather here periodically, because there's no other area that's as well suited as this for, I believe, hundreds of kilometers. So if we're talking about Neanderthal culture and consistent rituals over a large geographic area, consistent beliefs, shared religious ceremonies, periodically they would gather all together to exchange stories, to participate in ceremonies that would bond different communities together. I think this is the perfect spot for that. We know that there's a strong Neanderthal presence here. We have a number of caves that occur along the river valley as you ascend up toward the Mechit and up toward the plateau. These caves, to this day, preserve evidence of Neanderthal presence, evidence of Neanderthal rituals.
The anthropoid face of the Sphinx looks towards the west, to the Old Lady Mountain. Inside that mountain, there is a cave considered sacred for a very long time. Robert and we go to investigate.
And this is the bear hole.
Oh, okay.
Very echoey. The perfect place for some type of musical ceremony.
Yeah. I mean, maybe there were ritual feasts in a chamber like this.
What's the behavior of
the
Ice
bears?
Age? What was the behavior of Ice Age bears?
Right. And also,
Would it be natural for?
yeah,
Would
for
they all, would so many of them come here to
yeah,
die?
yeah. They just all decided to come here when they were about to die.
It's also possible that perhaps they were used in rituals.
That's what I'm thinking.
And
Maybe using tame bears.
yes, and if this place was used for performance, it would make a lot of sense
Yeah.
that they would have the dancing bears. Beautiful.
Really incredible space. It's amazing experience.
I don't know, for me it creates an experience that is pretty extraordinary, very moving, but it's hard to find the right words.
Yeah. It's not easily put in language. See, I'm wondering how they physically were following the river at this point.
Because the pass would be 20 meters down,
Right.
and the river is,
And the river is going through that pass.
yeah, and here it would be almost the same as narrow.
Right. But see what I'm saying is, where would they be walking unless they're walking right in the river?
That's what I would think, that they would be walking in the river.
People could have been coming from many, even hundreds of kilometers or more away, gathering at a certain time. Maybe this was something that happened every few years. Maybe it was even major ceremonies that occurred once in a generation, and it was a pilgrimage. And we can very much imagine, and I think it's more than just imagination, we can start to reconstruct how such pilgrimages occurred and what practices would have been carried out along the way. Maybe initiations were carried out along the passage, getting up to the plateau. We are really the combination in many ways of both Neanderthals and Cro-Magnons. And one question is, can we successfully integrate these two aspects? Arguably, Neanderthals were much closer to nature. They understood how they fit into nature much better than Cro-Magnons.
The overall experience of one going into this cave would be
The
sort of
same.
similar for a Neanderthal.
Oh,
than
I think it
for
would be
us.
very similar. We've had incredible experience here.
Especially if they had the better night vision.
I was going to say that
Yeah.
better night vision, and also what were they using for illumination? Even with really good vision, they had to have some kind of illumination. What are the acoustics in here?
Oh, well.
That's pretty good.
This place could be used for some sort of musical rituals.
Yeah. Worked well. You've got good acoustics potentially. You've got sort of a natural chimney. You've got water that you could
Yeah.
channel through. You probably keep a fairly, temperature-wise, fairly close tolerances year-round, naturally.
Yeah.
It's a perfect place to live.
It creates very interesting shapes all of a sudden. Things start to emerge.
Yeah. Yeah, isn't it amazing? Just one candle.
All of a sudden, for me, I don't know for you, everything looks a lot more organic and alive.
Yeah, I agree. Because I think the harsh headlamps and flashlights, they sort of flatten everything. You don't see the texture to it. It washes things out.
And imagine now a ceremony here and
Yeah.
a musical performance.
Oh, yeah. Well, things like pine trees and whatnot. If you brought in the pine branches, you know how if you light them, they just, all of a sudden, for a short period of time, you have it's like fireworks.
Exactly.
And I could see them doing things like that for dramatic effect and at certain times, during a ceremony. I bet a lot of the hearths and a lot of the fire remains that are found had nothing to do with warmth. It was probably ritualistic. I mean, they were used to the climate.
Exactly. And they would have fur.
And they would have fur and whatnot. And in fact, if anything, I could say, during these rituals, they might have been overheated because they're not, fires get really hot like that. And if you're used to, the natural climate and, relatively cold conditions, and that's what is normal for you, you wouldn't want to be building these huge fires just to get really hot, then to go back out and get really cold.
Build a huge fire and then also wear the fur. You would be boiling up.
So I bet a lot
and
of
that's the traditional image you see everywhere of
the huddling around the fire and
all around the fire wearing fur.
Yeah, it's probably not the case at all. Christmas traditions, which of course are way pre-Christian, bringing in a tree, bringing in, what do you call it, wreaths and vines, and
yes.
And does that go back 100,000 years or more?
This was covered with snow and ice.
Yeah.
The caves that we are going to see in a bit were probably covered by glaciers.
Mm-hmm. Or on the edge of a glacier somehow. So this is a bear cave. It reminds me of a pyramid in the sense of the height. Oh, I bet the floor may have been lower back then.
Exactly. Look at all this
deposits. Deposits inside here. Oh yeah, I can see it's getting more and more beautiful. Oh wow, it's like a cathedral. You don't get, at least I don't get this feel from a, quote, real church, unquote, modern church.
So it makes so much sense that this would be, like you said before, a ritual cave.
Thinking if they were bringing crystals in or special stones, they'd probably take them out again.
Yeah.
Use them. Or, I'm even thinking, if they were using some kind of crystals or whatnot, they might bring them in, sort of sanctify them, if I could put it that way, then they'd want to take them with them. So it's not like we would expect them to leave their valuables just laying about for us to find later. Yeah.
Stunning.
Those are really stunning. Yeah.
What a beautiful environment.
Yeah. Oh, this is really interesting how it works.
A few candles and a few crystals, and suddenly you have an extraordinary, unexpected experience away from modern life and time. What do you think about this setting with all with about 15 candles and?
Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, this is the first church or sanctuary or cathedral, whatever you want to call it.
Very much, it has the feel of a cathedral.
Yeah, I mean, I think the modern artificial churches and cathedrals and that they're trying to imitate this, not vice versa.
Yes, it makes me really feel religion, but not in a very deep and personal sense.
Yeah, not like an organized religion, but a real deep feeling of sanctity and spirituality, I would say. You go into a cathedral in many cases, one that is not illuminated by modern lighting, but is illuminated the more traditional way with very subdued lighting. Essentially, in my mind, you're going to an artificial cave. I think that many of the churches and cathedrals we see now from medieval or Renaissance times, for instance, are actually a legacy of the cave being used as a ritualistic site. Some of these legacies may go back tens of thousands of years. I suspect for Neanderthal culture, for Neanderthal civilization, maybe the single most important thing, the most central point, was their religion, what we would now call religion. I'm not sure they would have used that term because it may have been so all-encompassing for them that it was well beyond what we think of religion now in a modern Western sense. But the religiosity, the mental world that they developed, and we'll call it a religious/magical sense. And they may have been incredibly sophisticated, incredibly developed, I think possibly well beyond where we are today. The Cro-Magnons, I would speculate, tried to put it into simplistic terms. Well, what's going on with these other people, these Neanderthals? Who are they? We can't really understand what's going on, so they try to categorize in simple terms. Well, sometimes it's black, sometimes it's white, sometimes they're doing good things, sometimes they're doing bad things. And our modern concept of things like a good God, a bad devil, angels versus Satan, may have come from a simplistic Cro-Magnon understanding of much more subtle, much more nuanced Neanderthal rituals and religion. I suspect for Neanderthals, it wasn't a simple category of good on one side and bad on the other side, or what we would call God and devil. It may have been much more nuanced. They may have seen that you need both aspects. I even think of ancient religions in a classical sense. For instance, ancient Egyptians, they did not make this same distinction between good and bad as modern society often does. They realized that for the working of the cosmos, the universe, in a general sense as they saw it, there had to be both good and bad. You had to have both sides, or what we would call good and bad. They were just two ends of a continuous spectrum. And I suspect that Neanderthals saw a lot of gray area also.
I would say, well, we've got to accept that we are, Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon in one. It's not easy to do.
What we really have to do is to take our dual aspects, the Cro-Magnon aspects and the Neanderthal aspects, combine them so that neither overpowers the other, hit a balance between them, and if we can do that successfully, we may, in fact, create something that rises above either.
It could have been some sort of ritual or pilgrimage that would come here.
Right.
Sort of a returning.
Yeah.
Returning to the beginning.
Yeah. Maybe certain times of year, or maybe there may even be times that even bigger groups got together on a more lengthy cycle. Yeah, cyclical, maybe, based on a lunar cycle of the 19-year return or something like that, which would essentially be a generational thing. You might have a huge sort of congregation of different peoples.
Hundreds or
more.
Possibly thousands of people.
Yeah, which would have been, now you can visualize, it would have been really amazing.
It's something that makes it very intimate and personal.
Yeah.
At the same time, it's also very public and communal, but it's also very private.
Yeah, but it's reminding me of being in the caves. So you're getting almost that intimacy here, but then you can go out and it sort of ties them together.
It's almost as like you said, the shock, you're bringing out whatever.
Exactly.
And you're exposing it.
Exactly. And that's what's happening here.
To the people in the community.
Yeah.
And to the nature.
Exactly. It really does affect me. And because our civilization, it's based on such
triviality.
It seems today we are missing something vital to our human well-being. We are missing that deep connection with nature that Neanderthals had so well developed. How would rediscovering Neanderthal values impact our civilization today? What will this new awareness bring to our lives? They lived around the mountains and carved into them. They appreciated the natural beauty and had high mental abilities. Rousseau called them the guardians of an ancient wisdom. It was a magical work done by a culture whose science and understanding of the world was different from the present.
I think modern society and our people in modern society are afraid to deal with a lot of things. I think they're almost a terrible stereotype or generalization, but they're afraid to deal with anything that's really meaningful. It's not a given that a culture has to be materialistic.
Archaeologist Ralph Solecki ended his book, Shanidar, the First Flower People, saying, "In the face of the growing evidence, we will be forced to accept Neanderthal as our real humane ancestor."
And so you have this dichotomy between religion and intuition with Neanderthals, reason and logic with Cro-Magnons. And Stan Gush says that it was sort of monumental when the two met. Also, you had two different worldviews coming together. Neither really understood the other. So Neanderthals didn't really understand these new Cro-Magnons that were invading their territory. The Cro-Magnons didn't really understand what the Neanderthals were doing with all these weird rituals and ceremonies and dancing and singing that was foreign to them. They tried to figure it out, what they called magic.
Exactly, and they probably, how would you see these rituals? They would have to spy probably at night.
Try to figure out what's going on.
From a distance.
It must have been very mysterious, very scary to the Cro-Magnons to see these people doing all these things. You know, when you don't understand something, you fear it in many cases. Exactly. Much of our culture
and our beliefs. Our religious practices.
That's an inheritance from Neanderthals. So we, in a cultural sense, carry on many Neanderthal traditions.
Eric Trinkhaus, a leading Neanderthal expert, is convinced that the cult of immortality was invented by the Neanderthals. He thinks the Neanderthals were the first ones to practice burials, and that Homo sapien Cro-Magnon learned how to bury the dead from the Neanderthals. He observed how they buried and how they did their practices, and so he copied them. Daniel Rousseau had said that the Carpathian Mountains were at the center of the oldest European civilization known today. The first age was the age of truth and knowledge. The people lived around the sacred mountains of pyramidal summits and carved into them for us and for the future generations, signaling the caves. The cave represents the other world, but also the entire universe. It is a place that constitutes a world
in itself. The ritual cave sometimes imitates the night sky. In other words, it is an imago mundi, a universe in miniature. Living in a cave does not necessarily imply going down among the shades. It can as well imply living in a different world. A world that is vaster and more complex because it incorporates various modes of existence and hence is full of riches and countless virtualities.
Here in the mountains of Romania lies the blood of men, the subterranean tunnels where humanity saved itself during the flood. These are the caverns of the treasure referred to in so many world legends.
The Egyptian Sphinx is part of a larger complex, just like the Carpathian Sphinx is part of a larger complex. So in both cases, I believe we're talking sacred ceremonial sites that held incredible importance to their respective people, to their respective populations.
It is in these sacred mountains where people found their salvation after the flood, and where they will be saved when the next catastrophe occurs. It is vital today to find these sacred mountains and sacred caves.
They and other ancient, certain other ancient peoples, but we'll focus on Neanderthals for now, were much more sophisticated in ways that we don't even have a good language to describe. I mean, you have traditions around the world of a golden age, which I think is not referring to materialistic golden age. Our civilization has progressed one way, materialistically, and that type of sophistication we've plummeted. To judge a culture like the Neanderthals by the scanty remains, physical remains, it's sort of insane.
In fact, Neanderthals, with their traditions, with their concepts, they were the pioneers. Looking at the universe with its cosmic rhythms, untold beauty, and great dangers, they understood themselves as part of something bigger than they themselves were. They knew their place in the order of things. We need to recover that sense of the world.
In waking up to the new paradigm, we recover something long lost, something very old in ourselves. When you climb a mountain, you go with humility and devotion, as in a cathedral, where you enter not to conquer a creed, but to rediscover yourself, to rediscover something inside yourself, hidden for so long, that awaits to be awakened.
When you climb a mountain, you go with humility and devotion as in a cathedral, where you enter not to conquer a creed, but to rediscover yourself, to rediscover something inside yourself, hidden for so long that awaits to be awakened. Here's a setting where effectively in the mythology, in the religious beliefs, humans may have originated. Maybe this was the most important, the most sacred, the most central location for Neanderthal populations as a whole. It's as if you're approaching an incredible cathedral, an incredibly holy spot, and as you approach it, you come to various points where you prepare yourself for the ultimate adventure, the ultimate religious experience at the highest peaks. So this entire complex, which in many ways is symbolized by the Carpathian Sphinx, is a huge religious, ceremonial, ritualistic complex that must have been incredibly important to the Neanderthal people for generations and generations, probably thousands and thousands of generations over tens of thousands of years. Really important to me to be able to come here and experience firsthand the caves, to experience firsthand the plateau, to experience firsthand the Carpathian Sphinx. To me, in fact, in some ways, we can think of the Carpathian Sphinx as being a symbol for a lost world, literally a lost people, a lost culture. The mountain is a lost cathedral, and the Carpathian Sphinx is the lost altar.
These ones are the old ladies of Kokora Mountain. This is the mountain of the old lady. The Yalomitsa Valley hides the mountain called the Goddesses Mountain. The highest peak in Buchej, facing the north direction, the peak of the human being. This mountain is called the Origin or the Beginning Mountain. The main river flowing down the valley below the Goddesses Mountain was called the Naparis, which means Heavenly One. So the question is, why are all these women names in this mountain? and the sacred names, such as the mountain of the goddesses and the mountain called human being? Could there have been here a religious matriarchal society at one point in time? Could there have been a very ancient feminine worship? The origin of these names must be discovered, as the myths as well as the sculptures are before the time of the flood. The Sphinx has multiple profiles, best seen with the changing light. Where do the orbits of the Sphinx point to? Why are there all these figures, especially the ones looking west, towards the setting sun? The profile that resembles the Egyptian Sphinx is looking north. The profile that resembles an anthropoid face is looking west. Why does one profile look towards the north and another towards the west? One to the northern sky and the other one towards the setting sun. Why? And where is the door to the treasure? Who is this spirited god? Will I ever find out? The enigmatic faces are only seen from certain points of view. They are best seen with the changing light, the shadows of the moon and the sun. Will the sun point to a secret direction? Rousseau believed these monuments point to the sacred treasure found in caves. And what is the mystery of the gigantic rock, resembling very much a podium, a stage? Could this place have been used from some type of performance, from some rituals of a vanished humanity? A vast crowd could have been in the valley, looking up at somebody performing, singing or dancing on the top. Could this be the door to the treasure? Could this relate back to the Sphinx, to the caverns that Daniel Rousseau was talking about? Could the spiritual treasure Daniel Rousseau was talking about be found in these caves? This cave is on the mountain called Goddess's Mountain. The Sphinx was calling me to unravel its hidden story. I had to solve the mystery. Could the Carpathian Mountains and the Sphinx have a central yet forgotten role in the history of the world?
I'm probably best known in certain circles for my work on the Sphinx. I'm only going to mention that very briefly because I sort of feel like I have to, because in many ways it does set the stage for what we're here about at this conference on precession, ancient knowledge, and really pushing things way back. And this work that goes back almost 2 decades now for myself personally really set the stage for much of what has come later. And I'm not claiming any credit here, I'm giving credit to the Sphinx. And it's also changed my life. Sometimes I think, usually I think for the better, sometimes I wonder what I got myself into. So I really started on the Sphinx work when I was very young. This is me about 20 years ago. And what it really indicated doing, at least for some people, and this was part of the controversy and part of why we're here now, is talking about, if you push the day of the Sphinx back, does it mean that we have to view history differently? Do we have to rewrite history?
Dr. Robert Schock, a geologist from Boston University, is an expert in ancient stone. He had studied the Egyptian Sphinx for many decades, and he believes that the Egyptian Sphinx is much older than traditionally believed, dating back many thousands of years before the rise of Egyptian culture.
The head was recarved into the human form that it takes now. Parts of the Sphinx itself, if you look at it to this day, it's been heavily repaired. Some of those repairs go back 4,000 and more years because it was a much more ancient statue, thousands of years earlier. Things were happening in Egypt at a much earlier period than conventional archaeologists, conventional historians have ever admitted or suspected.
Dr. Shak believes that the fundamental ideas and the great knowledge of Egyptians to be more ancient than the Egyptian civilization itself. Dan Bernanu, a researcher from Bucharest, has spent the last 40 years investigating what he believes is the legacy of a lost civilization. All around the Carpathian Mountains and the plateau where the Sphinx is located, Dan Bernanu sees great evidence of a lost civilization.
Aici, uite, un om, un ochi, doi ochi, nasul.
Nas mare.
Aici, dantura, rânjind așa, nasul e simplist, fără nări. Așa, și aici, probabil, totuși un proces de degradare.
Daniel, and that one day someone will clarify the mystery and fill the empty question marks. Who were these vanished people that left their imprints in these monuments? It is in these sacred mountains where people found their salvation after the flood, and where they will be saved when the next catastrophe occurs. It is vital today to find these sacred mountains and sacred caves. Here we are in front of an original sculpture known all over the world that has not been reproduced in historical times. Being so used to the three-dimensional landscape starting in Sumerian times, we had failed until today to see these sculptures considered made by nature. The strangest apparition on the plateau is the Sphinx, a huge rock with an enigmatic profile around which a proto-historical legend had been formed. The legend says that the Sphinx is a statue made in times long forgotten by the people of a lost civilization.
Sort of U-shaped. You can't tell this from down at the base of the mountains. It's really like a fortress up there.
From a distance, it looks very abrupt, uninviting, with steep, rocky areas that are very hard to climb. But the reality of the mountain is actually something different.
Interestingly, once you get up there, you get the unexpected. It opens up into a huge plateau.
The Sphinx is the central point on the plateau. Going south, directly from the Sphinx, there is a group of enigmatic rocks called the Peaks of Longing. From here, in direct line to the north, one can see the Sphinx and then the highest peak, called Omu. the peak of a human being.
Something that's very interesting looking at the Sphinx in Romania, looking at the plateau, looking at the surrounding area, is you have these, at high elevation, you have these incredible structures. They can be seen from a very great distance. They certainly seem like markers or signposts or something that might attract ancient peoples, and I think this is something we have to take very seriously.
Many of the rocks on the plateau have feminine names. This one is called the Big Old Lady Rock. We can only see as far forward as we remember back.
I don't know what the future is going to be, and there may not be a future. There may not be one. It may all end in disaster of one kind or another.
The Greek historian Plato believed that there had been many great civilizations that had disappeared in a variety of catastrophes. Today, humanity has forgotten the past. In the human unconscious, there is an extremely powerful force that acts on an individual, keeping him from seeing with clarity the obvious symptoms of his next death. Only in the last moments are the eyes of the soul opened and man understands his situation and accepts it. The landslide of all the empires and all the human institutions is evident as soon as one studied the past. Why do we believe in a progress without end? Everything dies around us. High atop a vast plateau in the wild Carpathian mountains of old Europe, there is an unknown, enigmatic sculpture that strikingly resembles the Great Sphinx of Egypt. For that reason, it was named the Carpathian Sphinx. Could there be a link between the Carpathian Sphinx and the Great Sphinx of Egypt? Could the Carpathian Sphinx be the result of a lost civilization? While living in Boston, I go and I check all the library sources I can find. Unconvinced by what I find, I decide to leave the United States. And I return to Eastern Europe, to the homeland I left 15 years before. Rousseau, a Peruvian archaeologist and protohistorian from Peru, has come to believe that there once had been a great worldwide civilization that had been destroyed in a cataclysm. This civilization left marks all over the world in all the continents. Rousseau found proof in England in such monuments as the Stonehenge, in France, in Fontainebleau. Wherever he looked, he found proof. He became aware that the civilization was especially a mountain civilization that lived on the high peak of the mountains in all the continents. In 1954, Rousseau discovered Marcahuasi, a small plateau high atop the Andes Mountains in Peru. Marcahuasi, up to this date, remains a mystery. There are faces here of women. He called this one the Monument to Humanity. Rousseau believed that the Monument to Humanity was one of the most important sculptures ever made. In 1968, Rousseau came to the Carpathian Mountains in Romania. Here, Rousseau found the proof that he was searching for. Everywhere he looked on the Bucegi Massif in the Carpathian Mountains, he found proof of a very ancient culture. He believed here was the door to the treasure of a lost people. Rousseau believed that the treasure is not a material one, but a spiritual treasure. Rousseau investigated the area around the Carpathian Sphinx, and he found tantalizing proof of this lost civilization here as well. The Carpathian Sphinx is an ancient monument sculpted before the flood, destroyed in the face, being very corroded by wind and rain. Rousseau concluded that the Carpathian Sphinx, just as the monument to humanity in Marcahuasi, was the important legacy of a lost people. When he returned to Peru, Rousseau published a book called The Fantastic History of a Discovery, and in that book he wrote about the trip to Romania. He dedicated a chapter to what he saw in the Carpathian Mountains, and he said, "The Romanian Carpathian Mountains were at the center of the oldest European civilization known today." His conclusions were made after he saw the Carpathian Sphinx. Rousseau died in 1991, before he was able to find this worldwide vanished civilization. But his work paved the road for later research. Rousseau was confident that he was right